Chapter 17. On the Eve of Battle. "What's up with you two?" said a voice, knocking me out of my trance. The whole ride over on the transport, I hadn't spoken. From the time I left my room, I felt like I weighed 1,000 pounds. The original adrenaline of the situation must have been carrying me, because the moment I awoke, my body felt heavy and I was sluggish. "What?" I replied, ignoring the obvious. "What do you mean, what?" she replied, mocking me. "You guys are slugging around like zombies. What happened last night?" I looked over at Sam, who was sitting at the back of the transport. He looked worse than I did. He sweated like he had a terrible fever and looked worse than I felt. "I don't want to talk about it," I replied, too tired to explain. "Well, if you're not going to talk about it, at least stop acting like you're hungover," she retorted. "Eve's about to get into the biggest fight of her life, and you and Sam are acting like you could care less." "Sai, who cares?" I replied in a frustrated tone. My words caught the attention of everyone around me, aside from Eve, who sat in the front with earphones on. "What?" Sai replied, squinting like she was ready to explode. The report from the night shot through me. It gave me such a realistic view of the trials and how much of it was pomp and glamour. "Who cares?" I repeated defiantly, without my voice raising at all. "This whole stupid competition is dumb. There are people in the real world who could be going to hell. The last thing on my mind is this competition. I don't care about it." They all looked at me, surprised by my words. "Did you have another vision or something?" Uriah replied. "No, he's just a brat," Jacob cut in. "I swear, you are more emotional than these little girls." "Shut up, Jacob," I fired back. "Does it have something to do with the argument you and Sam had?" Pete added. "Argument?" Sai replied, staring a hole through me. "Were you guys fighting?" Sam's attention raised at the sound of Sai's words. He gave me a pleading look, begging me not to speak. "No," I replied, relenting. "Look, Michael showed up last night." Sam's attention and demeanor changed, along with everyone around me. "What? When?" Sai added. "Last night. He woke me up. He showed me a news segment where they were talking about the way things are back in the Earth realm," I explained. "He chastised me, saying that we needed to stop focusing on the stupid trials and pay attention to the reason we're really here." "What was the news story about?" Pete pressed. "Just there are a lot of lost people and they're looking for answers," I replied, "and we aren't there to give it to them." Jacob's demeanor changed. He almost seemed embarrassed as he slumped back down as we pulled up to the stadium. "Wish me luck," Eve replied, throwing her bag over her shoulder, oblivious. She was completely oblivious to the conversation going on around her. She seemed relatively normal and abnormally confident considering the fact that the girl she was fighting had put her sister in the hospital with extreme prejudice. We all nodded, not wanting to alert her to the growing situation as she rose to exit. "Tim," she replied bashfully, "could you walk with me, just until I get up to the entrance?" Sai eyed me like if I said anything but yes, she was going to punch me into another dimension. I rolled my eyes coyly and put a smile on as I rose to follow her. What a difference a month made. Just one ET month earlier, I would have given my right arm for an opportunity to be able to coherently spend time with Eve, but now I was basically being pulled kicking and screaming. "Good luck, Eve," Danielle, Sai, and Sam all said at varying times. She nodded as we stepped off the transport. I looked up at the rainbow sky, taking a second to embrace the world around me. It was so peaceful. It was so beautiful. There was no sun, just an everlasting light that had no origin. "Tim?" Eve continued hesitantly. "Yeah," I replied. "Look, I know you're a little annoyed at me," she replied apologetically. I looked at her, completely confused about what she was referring to. I quickly changed my demeanor to save face. "I am," I replied coyly. "Well, yeah, I know I haven't been friends with you that long, But I can tell you have been a little out of it all morning, she replied. Considering you haven't spoken to me, I'm guessing you're still angry with me about last night. Until she brought up the incident from the night before, I hadn't thought about the last time we spoke. Eve, I replied, getting ready to come clean. No, seriously, I understand, she replied, cutting. I was being immature. I mean, it's not like we're dating or anything like that. She gave me an urging and hopeful look that I failed to pick up on because of the cluster of statements. She cleared her throat after a lasting second, then continued. I know that, but you obviously know how I feel about you, she replied, almost taking my breath away with her words. What? I mustered, unable to believe her words. I mean, I asked you out. I get that you were shy about things then. I guess things have changed since then, don't you think? Maybe just a little? She continued, embarrassed by my non-reply. Oh, yeah, you mean how you feel about our friendship, I managed. When you said, I thought you meant, but yeah, our friendship has changed. She looked at me, confused by my response, then smiled, pulling her hair behind her ear. I'd like to think we're good friends now, she replied. I shouldn't have acted so jealous when it came to you two. You've been friends for a long time, and I guess at times I feel jealous of that. I nodded, still reeling, and trying to come back around after the initial excitement. My heart was in my throat. Well, I replied, choking on my words. You don't have anything to be jealous about, I guess. We have plenty of time to get to know each other, and... I swallowed hard, finally growing a backbone. This was the opportunity I had been waiting for. If it killed me, I was going to take advantage of this chance. I know we're a little young, I replied, getting ready to say the words I had been trying to work up the nerve to say for a little under a year. But my dad said he met my mom when he was about our age. I'm not saying... I like Sai as a friend, and I never liked anybody before, so I'm not totally sure what the difference is, but, well, I think I know the difference. She smiled an assuming smile that gave me a little more confidence. What are you trying to say? She replied with a smile that melted me. I paused to gather myself once more, then took a deep breath and continued. I'm saying I want you to be, like, my girlfriend, I replied. Yeah, I think I want you to be my girlfriend. Girlfriend-like person. I cringed, not even able to look her in the eye as I spoke. I wanted to turn around and walk away. You think you want me to be your girlfriend-like person? She replied with a joking smirk that made me feel even dumber. I nodded, looking at the ground as my very being crumbled. I would have rather taken another punch from one of those demon spawns at that moment. Sorry, I replied, trying to save face. Just forget it. No, I won't forget it, she mocked, raising my head and staring me in the eyes. She smiled and planted a kiss on my cheek. I almost swallowed my tongue as my heart began to beat out of control. I won't forget it because it's one of the cutest things I've ever heard, she said, staring into my eyes lovingly. Are you really asking me to be your girlfriend? I nodded bashfully. Tim Eli is asking me to be his girlfriend, she replied, looking in the air, smiling from ear to ear. I couldn't believe her reaction. I thought I was terrible at hiding how I felt, but she acted as if she had no clue. The way you acted, I thought you knew I liked you already, I mumbled. She fumbled bashfully before shrugging in a relenting fashion. I thought maybe, but the way you act with Sai, it's hard to tell sometimes, she replied. I rolled my eyes, agitated by the constant accusations. It had been incessant. I shook my head in an agitated manner. Why does everyone say that? I replied with a frustrated sigh. Take a wild guess, she replied in a matter-of-fact type tone. What do you mean? I replied, still oblivious. Sai is my best friend, nothing else, Eve. My gosh, you guys are really starting to agitate me with this. Sai said something similar last night, she replied, raising her hands in surrender. I get it. I don't have a bond like that with, a boy. It's odd. Most boys generally only talk to me when they have a crush on me. To be honest, before this, I didn't have one male friend. I guess it's going to take some time for me to get used to. Don't worry about it. It's really not you, it's Jacob and Luke. They've been saying it since we were small kids. It was hard enough ignoring it when it was just them. Now the whole freaking heaven realm is in on the joke, I angrily grunted. I realized the opportunity I was letting slip as I looked into her beautiful brown eyes. She was beyond pretty, and I couldn't believe she actually liked me. I kept waiting on a lever to pull, dropping me back into reality. It was an otherworldly experience. She showcased a look that matched mine, and deep down, she felt the experience was as surreal as I did. I fought the butterflies swirling in my stomach, and bravely entered her space, bashfully lowering my head as she smiled in a flirtatious manner at my actions. Regardless, that aside, I will officially answer your question, she replied, locking fingers with me as we both stepped forward, closing the small distance between as I wrapped my arms around her. I would love to be your girlfriend-like person. I chuckled, acknowledging her joke. I had no idea what to do next. I held her, staring into her eyes, lost in her beauty. Okay, so what do we do now? I replied, turning to her. How does this work? What are the rules? She shrugged, then stood for a second, thinking about the question. I guess the same thing we've been doing, except more relationship-like, she assumed with a snicker. I mean, we can walk and hold hands and stuff and kiss, I guess, if you want to, if this isn't too forward. I almost buckled at her words. The thought of kissing her made my heart skip with excitement. I chuckled as my nerves started to take over. Have you, ever kissed someone before? I managed, causing her face to turn red with embarrassment as she shook her head no. Have you? She responded timidly. Just Sai, I responded, before grimacing as I realized my gaffe. She chuckled, causing my heart to slow. Have you ever intentionally kissed someone? She continued playfully. I mimicked her actions from before. I shook my head bashfully, lowering it. She placed her hand on my chin and forced me to look her in the eyes as she slowly moved her lips toward mine. It was like I was living out my greatest fantasy from Angel Haven as I met her actions, pressing my lips into hers. Her lips were soft, and the act melted me as I maneuvered around to her cheek, kissing her again as we embraced each other in a hug. How was that? She whispered in my ear, exhaling like she just downed her favorite milkshake. I wanted to say it was the best thing I ever felt, but truthfully, it wasn't. The kiss was a culmination of close to 2 years of unrequited affection for the girl. It was amazing, but I would be lying if I said it made me feel the way the kiss Sai and I shared in the office made me feel. It just didn't have the same electricity as the haunting and confusing first kiss. It was more than enough to confuse me. I pushed the feelings away as the difference between my first real kiss and this one. It was amazing, I uttered with a chuckle. She rested her head on my shoulder, as if she was trying to find a semblance of peace before the chaos. I tried to block out the thought of her being hurt like Beth as long as I could, but the prospect had me nervous. I squeezed the girl, not wanting to release her to be hurt. I'll be okay, she whispered, sensing my heavy heart. I nodded, releasing her as she kissed me once more, causing me to lower my head in an embarrassed manner. Okay, I replied, holding on to her hand. Well, whatever happens, we'll be together, right? She replied, squeezing my hands and pulling me toward the arena. But for now, I'm Tim Eli's girlfriend, and that's enough for me. It felt completely weird initially. I thought there would be a different overall feeling, but everything felt the same as it did before. I followed as she released my arms and began to talk to me as she walked, backpedaling. "I can't wait to tell Sai," she replied. "Ignoring the fact that I might be in the hospital tomorrow, this is the best day of my life." Mine too," I replied, shaky. "Yeah, I can tell from your tone," she replied, mocking me. I lowered my head as we entered a crowd of people. "Oh, sorry," I replied apologetically. "It's just hard to be happy when my girlfriend could be lying in a hospital bed in an hour." "Thanks for the confidence, Tim," she responded. I stared at her, a little irked by her demeanor. It was like she wasn't taking the danger seriously. "Eve," I uttered, pressing her to stop giving me a hard time. "I'm just joking," she replied, laughing. Whack! I recoiled as she smashed into Cadmiel, purposely blocking her way into the entrance in an attempt to intimidate the girl. Eve quickly turned around and recoiled sternly, staring at her. "Watch where you're going, Theta," she replied in a cocky tone. "I wouldn't want you to get hurt before I can put you in a hospital bed, next to your sister. You know, twin beds for the twins. Wouldn't that be sweet?" Her words seemed to light a fire under Eve, as I could physically feel her faith energy rise as she stared at Cadmiel sternly without a reply. Cadmiel smiled as she tossed her bag over her shoulder, shaking her head, unimpressed as she entered the arena. Eve's energy slowly went back down as the girl disappeared into the double doors. "I almost forgot why I'm here," she replied, looking determined as she stared at the arena. "Are you okay?" I replied. "I mean, really?" "Yes, I'm fine, or I think I'll be fine," Eve replied. "I have my best friend and my boyfriend in my corner. What could go wrong, right?" I gave her a cynical look, accepting her invitation to be in her box. She gave me a hug and turned, taking a deep breath before entering the arena. "Eve, please be careful. I can't let what happened to Beth happen to you." "I won't," I shot, causing the smile to drain from her face as she gave me an affirming nod before she disappeared through the portal. "Good luck," I replied, like a worried parent. I was focused on the real world, but regardless of how I felt about the trials, my friends were in danger, and that was something I had forgot about in the midst of my anger with Sam and the glitz and glamour of the event. I felt a hand come down on my shoulder, snapping me out of my gaze. "Me and you," I heard a familiar voice say. "We're Eve's hired help this time around. This is my first time, so you're going to have to walk me through this stuff." I turned to see Sai standing with a smile, and initially a feeling of guilt filled me, and I couldn't explain it. She was beautiful as usual, but the way the light hit her face as I turned made her look like an angel as she smiled. I turned away as I replied, afraid that she would sense how entranced she had me in that moment. I quickly composed myself before moving to lead the girl through the portal hole. "It'll be my pleasure, Miss Hikari," I replied with a nod and a smile. She looked surprised by my demeanor, leaning back in a mocking manner. She stepped back and looked me over like she was checking to see if it was actually me. "What?" I replied, playing coy. "What happened?" she replied, looking at me with an intrusive stare, then at the vacant spot Eve exited from. I wanted to tell her, but if it came out at that point, I would have had to sing it as good as it felt to say Eve Tamila was my girlfriend. "Nothing," I replied, bursting. "Tim?" she replied in a demanding tone. "I'll tell you later, I promise, but right now, we have to help Eve with her trial," I replied, deflecting the conversation. She stared at me with a stubborn look before finally relenting. "Well, whatever it was, it did a lot for your morale," she replied, walking up to the door and opening it before stepping to the side and letting me enter. I was caught between feelings of worry and euphoria. I was happy that I could say my 2-year goal was accomplished. I couldn't wait to tell Pete and Sam. I was bursting at the seams, but at the same time, Cadmiel sounded ruthless, and she didn't look like she was going to hold her punches like she did with Beth, and that prospect had me terrified. "Well, it puts things in perspective," I replied. She glared at me one last time with a prying stare before rolling her eyes in a relenting fashion. "Regardless, it's good to hear," she replied, sighing. I turned to see the rest of the Legion hot on our heels, along with Jade and Max. They talked among each other, not even noticing us as we went ahead of them into the arena. "After you," she joked, continuing her concierge imitation, opening the door with a playful bow. I shook my head and returned the favor when we got to the isolation room. She smiled, tilting her head graciously. "See, it's not hard to not be a jerk," she poked. "Ha ha ha, just get in the room," I shot back. The opening ceremonies again seemed to drag on as Sai and I sat waiting impatiently. I sat leaning in my chair with my feet on the dashboard interface. "Tim, put your feet down," Sai replied, slapping my boots down. "Excuse me, Mom," I replied. She shook her head, chuckling to herself, as I leaned forward, playfully resting my head on my forearm, pretending to be asleep. "Wake me up when it starts," I replied. She cut her eyes at me, playfully offended. "You haven't seen me in days, and this is how you react to being locked in a room with me for a few minutes," she joked. "And I had such high hopes after you showed up to my bedside." Her words brought me back to the initial feeling I felt seeing her lying unconscious on her bed, and my face showcased as much. She showed a regretful demeanor, then quickly apologized. "I'm sorry," she replied with a grin. "Too soon?" "It's fine. It's just I never knew how much of who I am is wrapped up in my relationship with you," I muttered, staring forward to kill the awkwardness of the moment. "I was lost without you." She chuckled, blushing, flattered by my words. "What can I say? I love you, kid," I responded, forcing myself to look her in the eyes so that she understood that the depth of my words were serious. She stared at me, unable to respond initially. She composed herself, turning back to the screen, unable to hold back a smile. "I love you too, idiot," she shot bashfully, melting under the seriousness of my stare. I chuckled, playfully amused by her awkwardness about me being so affectionate. Eve and Cadmiel finally appeared on the screen as the crowd cheered loudly. Sai and I exchanged looks that signified the changing of dynamic as we turned to the screen. "You ready, Eve?" Sai asked. Eve took a deep breath, calming herself. "Yeah, I'm fine," she replied. Cadmiel laughed mockingly, looking Eve over. "You're even scrawnier than your sister was," she replied. "Let's save time and you a lot of pain and just forfeit the trial. Either way, this thing is ending with us going up 3-1. Eve stared her over without saying a word. She pulled her twin dagger pistols from their holsters and stared them down before pointing them at Cadmiel. "This isn't Earth, sweetie," Cadmiel replied mockingly. "You're going to need more than just cold steel." As she spoke, she began to power up to her first stage. "Well, we'll see, won't we?" Eve replied, her pistol still aimed at the girl. Whoosh! Eve focused her pistols on a blur as Cadmiel disappeared and shot toward her. "Stay on your toes, Eve," Sai warned. Pow! Bang, bang, bang! Eve fired shots at Cadmiel's trailing blurs, but she wasn't close to hitting her. Boom! Bang, 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 bang! Cadmiel swung, leveling a nearby pillar as Eve narrowly dodged, still firing from the hip as she barrel rolled out of the way. "I'm coming, princess," Cadmiel warned. Blah! Bang! 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 Cadmiel rammed into Eve with a shoulder charge that sent her flipping. Eve was so agile that she righted her ship and fired downwind as Cadmiel tried to capitalize. "Great job, Eve," I encouraged on pins and needles. Cadmiel wiped the dust off her armor as she smiled, staring Eve down, impressed with her speed and reflexes. "So, you're not as pathetic as your sister after all," Cadmiel continued to mock. I thought she bought seconds at best. I had no confidence in Eve's chances against this girl. My heart was beating faster with every second that passed. "You have no idea," Eve shot back, catching us off guard. Blam! She changed direction with speed that was unworldly and blasted Cadmiel with a blow that almost knocked the teeth out of her mouth. Cadmiel let out a gasp that made me cringe. Her body bounced and landed into a nearby pillar as the girl grimaced, fighting to understand what happened. The power Eve struck with was on another level. "That was for bumping into me in the hallway," Eve replied, pointing her guns at Cadmiel as she walked toward her like a predator stalking its prey. "I was getting some pretty important news at the time, and you almost ruined it for me." Sai looked at me with an inquisitive stare before turning back to the battle. "Bravo," Cadmiel replied, wiping the blood from her mouth. Whoosh! Bang, 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 bang! Cadmiel disappeared as Eve fired shots at her. Eve surveyed the layout, using her extended pistols as a scope, searching for Cadmiel. "So, you're hiding now?" Eve replied. "I know you're not afraid of scrawny little old me." Wham! Eve dodged as Cadmiel took another swipe at her, smashing into the ground with a looping punch that leveled the terrain around her. Her speed and reflexes were off the chart. Cadmiel was visibly frustrated as she surveyed the ground looking for the girl, but Eve was like a flicker of electricity. "I'm going to hurt you for that," Cadmiel replied, knocking the rubble off her shoulder. "I don't run and I don't hide from anyone." She surveyed the ground as Eve appeared across the way in a flicker, with her pistols still extended. To the untrained eye, her pistols were useless, but I knew better. The shots obscured Cadmiel's dash just long enough for Eve to predict her moves. It was so genius, and with Eve's natural fighting skill, we had no real advice to give her. She was holding her own, all on her own. Bang, bang, ping, ping! Eve fired, lighting her up with shots, ricocheting them off of Cadmiel's armor. "You're a fast little thing, aren't you?" Cadmiel replied, shielding herself. Eve let out a whistle that dropped Cadmiel to her knees. "Heads up," Eve replied. Eve appeared in front of her in a crouching stance, socking her with an uppercut that nearly knocked her head off. Cadmiel soared high in the air from the impact, smashing hard into a nearby pillar. "That was for calling me scrawny," Eve replied, standing defiantly, still pointing the pistols at her. Eve cautiously approached Cadmiel's landing spot, with her pistols still aimed at the girl. Seconds passed as everyone in the crowd cheered. We waited impatiently, anticipating what was coming next. "You little..." Cadmiel exclaimed in a deafening tone. "Rah!" The pillar exploded as Cadmiel appeared. Her hair was glistening. It took her the full fight to use her anointed skill against Beth. It didn't take her long to realize she didn't stand a chance against Eve without it. She exploded as her hair grew, signifying she had gone to the next level. Her power seemed to suck the life from Eve as she got distance and collapsed, shielding herself behind a nearby pillar, breathing fast, suffocating breaths. "Where are you?" Cadmiel screamed, throwing a pillar like it was weightless. "Eve, stay hid," Sai replied. I shook my head in awe. Her power was unreal. The ground cracked under her feet with every step that she took. Her hair had grown substantially since her power spike. It was too soon to say if Eve was outmatched or not, but judging by Cadmiel's faith energy and experience, it was apparent Eve had an uphill battle at the least. "Thanks for the genius idea," Eve replied, peeking around one of the pillars. "What's your next string of advice? Block the next time she throws a punch?" Don't tell me you're hiding after all your big talk and boasting, Cadmiel replied, stomping and surveying the layout. Oddly, there wasn't a spike in Eve's biorhythm. She was suspiciously calm, although she played a disarmed demeanor to Sai. I knew better because of the extra touch sensory trait I had. She was like a rock in the midst of all the chaos around her. Please tell me you have a plan? Sai shot. Yeah, Eve sighed, pulling her pistols from their holsters. Bang, bang, ping, ping! Eve fired shots at Cadmiel that the ultra-powered girl swatted like flies. Hopefully that wasn't it, Sai added, placing her hand on her forehead in a worried manner. Ugh! Eve let out. Before she could, Cadmiel appeared, blocking her way with a devious smirk. Hi, sweetheart. Remember me? She antagonized, standing confidently, blocking Eve's path. I told you I'd catch you. Yeah, well, seeing is believing, Eve shot back with a regret-filled, playful smile. Wham! A sickening sound, a punch, turned my stomach as Eve moved to retreat in the opposite direction. Eve! Sai let out. Kaboom! Smash! Boom! Cadmiel swatted her with a blow that sent her flying like a bullet through about 3 or 4 pillars. She flipped wildly before slamming against the stadium wall and collapsing in a heap on the ground. Eve, are you okay? I added. Seriously, Tim? Eve let out, exhaling in a pain-filled groan. I just got smacked through about 4 walls before hitting a stone barrier. Other than that, I'm just peachy. How do you think I'm doing, Tim? Ugh! Eve spit blood and wiped the remaining blood from her mouth. I stared at Sai, afraid to intervene for fear of saying something stupid. Me and Sai added little to no advice to the girl. The truth was, Eve and Beth's fighting styles were vastly different, and the advantages of Beth's versatility weren't at Eve's disposal. I could tell the girl was growing impatient with us giving her little to nothing but moral aid since the duel started. My gosh, that hurt, Eve replied, struggling to her feet. Wham! Explode! Eve narrowly dodged as Cadmiel went for a knockout blow, obliterating the wall directly behind her. Shut your trap, girl! Cadmiel responded, standing next to the spot, her power exploding through. Pow, pow, bang, bang! Eve let out shots that ricocheted off Cadmiel's armor. Cadmiel let out, shooting towards Eve. Eve, watch out! Sai exclaimed. It was too late. Before she could move, Cadmiel was restricting her passage in a manner identical to the way she did before. Eve, don't! I warned, predicting the girl's move before she made it. Crunch! She flashed in front of Eve, grabbing her around her wrists, holding her up by her arms like she was a baby. My gosh, girl, you're a hard girl to get a hold of, Cadmiel chuckled as Eve fought to free herself. Swift! Eve sent a knee into her throat, causing her to let go before light stepping to the other side of the arena. Eve! I exclaimed, seeing Cadmiel's path immediately. She's still... Swift! Bang! Boom! Before Eve could prepare for the blow, Cadmiel had struck with a shoulder block that sent her skipping like a stone in a pond. She pinged off the ground, then hard into a nearby wall, landed on her side in a heap. Ouch! Eve let out, writhing in pain as she rolled over to a crawl. Eve, shake it off! She's still coming! Sai replied. Cadmiel stalked her in a mocking tone as she crawled, trying to regain her bearings. Is it too late to admit I was wrong? Eve continued, coughing up blood once again. Eve, will you stop joking around? I shot forcefully. Do you realize this girl is trying to seriously injure you? Did you miss that? Eve grimaced once again, spitting blood before wiping the remainder of it off her mouth. Trust me, Tim, I've noticed, she shot, mimicking my words from days earlier. I sighed, frustrated with her actions, turning to Sai with an irritated head shake before Cadmiel tipped off her next attack. "Eve, look out!" I ordered a second too late. Cadmiel grabbed her and slammed her into a nearby wall. Bang, bang, ping, ping! Eve fired at point-blank range as Cadmiel moved her head from side to side, dodging each shot. "Give me this!" Cadmiel replied, snatching her pistols and tossing them to the side. "Element Alpha, light command, solar glares!" Eve let out. Pop, pop, pop! Eve let out a firecracker-like display in point-blank range of Cadmiel's face in a last-ditch effort to get away. Cadmiel recoiled from the explosion, dropping Eve in the process. I didn't know if the girl was going by the flight of her seat or if it was stuff she had planned, but she was resourceful. Every time it seemed the girl had her dead to rights, she would pull something out of her bag of tricks to give her more time. It had me on edge, but up to that point, she hadn't taken much damage. "Great job, Eve. Now get some distance," Sai urged her. But Eve, to our surprise, she landed on her knees like she was powerless. The attack seemed to be all she could manage. To me, it made no sense. That move was child's play, and Eve was one of our powerful team members. She had reserves that shouldn't have been dented by such a meek attack. None of it made sense to me. Her demeanor also was off-putting. It was like she never took the fight serious. She pretended to be following my lead, but Eve and I handle conflict different. I was more laid back naturally. Eve was pure carnage when she was angry, but from the start, she was taking the fight like it was a sparring session. She reserved most of her anger toward us, and did little more than provoke Cadmiel. I watched, trying to make sense of things, as Cadmiel exploded, more angry than ever. She grunted angrily, surveying the layout as her hair grew longer, and her power exploded to an even higher level. "Still got some fight in you, huh?" she replied, walking over to Eve. "Your sister did too. We all saw how that ended." Heave, black, boom! She grabbed Eve by her armored shirt and tossed her. She crashed into a nearby pillar, then flopped awkwardly into the other side of the arena wall. "Eve?" Sai replied, visibly angry. "Oh," Eve grunted, rubbing her back before flipping over and resting helplessly. "Eve, you have got to get up and get some distance," I ordered, panicking as she lay writhing in pain. This girl was a loose cannon, and her teammates stated she had a violent temper. I could only imagine what was in store for Eve if she lost her head. Swift, boom! Cadmiel leaped into the air, landing hard on the ground, inches away from Eve's downed body. "This all could have been easy," she mocked, cracking her knuckles. "I didn't want to put someone else in the hospital, but you brats are the thickest chicks on the planet." Wham! Oh! She punted Eve like a rag doll, as Eve let out a blood-curdling grunt. She bounced across the sand before rolling into a heap about 100 yards away. My heart went into my throat, afraid I was going to have to witness another vicious beating. Eve lay exhaling, holding her arm before fighting to her feet. "Aw, did I hurt your little arm?" Cadmiel replied, chuckling to herself. "I'm going to hurt you for that," Eve replied, cradling her visibly broken arm. "You're still talking?" Cadmiel replied, exasperated. "I've beaten the tar out of you and you're still talking. Why?" Boom! She leveled Eve with a punch that nearly took her head off. "Don't!" Wham! She hit her with another. "You!" Boom! She continued with another. "Just wham!" She fired again, as Eve's head flew from right to left with every blow. "Shut your mouth!" she finally finished, as Eve collapsed face first. She grinned as she stood over Eve confidently. "I told you I was going to put you in a matching hospital bed with your sister, didn't I?" Cadmiel continued, picking her up by her hair as Eve writhed in pain. "I'm a girl of my word." Swift! Ah! We watched in disbelief as Eve snatched a handful of hair in a blaze of speed that was beyond even Cadmiel's. Cadmiel dropped to one knee in pain, grabbing at Eve feebly as she shot past her. "Oh yeah, I forgot about you saying that," Eve replied, tossing the hair in the air like confetti. "Eve?" Sai replied in awe. "How did you do that?" Cadmiel stared at Eve with a demeanor that seemed to beg the same question. Eve tossed her hair back, exposing her face. It was spotless, not a mark on it. After the beating she had just taken, it was an amazing sight that sparked cheers from the crowd that was deafening. "Let's just say I wasn't Mrs. Goodwin's favorite for nothing," Eve replied, standing in a rejuvenated stance. "I played lead 2 years in a row. You don't do that without learning a few tricks about acting." Sai shook her head with a chuckle. I had spent most of our drama days asleep in the crowd, but I would occasionally wake up to take a rare chance to stare at Eve without suspicion. I soaked it up, maybe to the extent that I missed the point of the play to begin with, so it wasn't surprising that I didn't get Eve's reference right away. "Bull!" Cadmiel fired, infuriated. "There's no way you could have taken my blows at Tier 3. There is no way! I've decapitated A-class rogues with those blows." Eve chuckled. "See, there is something about us twins you may or may not know," Eve continued, catching our attention. "We're alike in more ways than you know." Cadmiel's fist clenched as she stared at Eve like she wanted to tear her apart. "Yeah, right. You and that flake are nothing alike," Cadmiel continued. "That's my sister," Eve replied, showing an anger that exploded for the first time, causing a faint navy blue light to leap from her eyes. Cadmiel cut her eyes, realizing she had finally cut into the sarcastic demeanor Eve had been showcasing from the beginning of the fight. I sat back, realizing every intuition I had was right. I knew something seemed off about the whole fight. Now it made sense. Eve was playing possum the entire time, and I had no idea what the reasoning for doing it was. Eve calmed herself, showcasing a fake smile as I sat forward, hoping for a plausible explanation for why she would make us believe she was being beaten. "We are alike. I may not be into books and computers, or maybe I am, or I used to be. Regardless, we share the same traits. The only difference is my sister, while smart, is nowhere near as cunning or shrewd as I am. In retrospect, I am as smart as my sister, but nowhere near as nice," Eve warned, staring the girl down with a look that I saw once before. The look was the look I saw in Eve's face the night before Beth's duel. It was the face she showcased before she completely lost control of her emotions. It was on display, and the BAU vibes I was picking up were so cold they terrified me. "Yeah, right," Cadmiel replied, showing a slight bit of concern in her voice. "You're bluffing." Eve smiled in a mocking manner. "Am I?" Eve replied, running her hands over her face, showcasing its flawless condition. "Every step you've taken, every move you've made, I have been one step ahead of. Every advantage you thought you were gaining was putting you exactly where I needed you to be, you idiot." Cadmiel had a response to Eve's words that sparked a physical reaction that put me on edge. I turned to Sai as she gave me a look, begging for insight on what's going on. Before I could respond, Cadmiel cut in. "What did you say to me?" she replied, snarling. Eve clenched her fist, staring at Cadmiel with an unflinching glare. "Don't worry about what I said. That doesn't matter," she replied, with extreme vitriol seeping out with every word. "Hear what I'm saying. I'm going to beat the crap out of you for what you did to my sister." "Eve, stop it," Sai replied. "You said this wasn't about that." Eve cracked her neck in a cold manner as she stared at the girl, begging for her to make a move. "No, I said I challenged her because I thought I could beat her," Eve replied. I turned to Sai, shaking my head in disbelief before pressing down on the intercom. "No, you said this wasn't about your sister," I fired. "Eve, you lied to us and you lied to the council. You're going to forfeit the match." Eve exploded with power until it looked like her body was covered in an inferno like fire. I said earlier that I had no idea how powerful she was, but this was on a whole new level. I thought back to our training and Jade's words after Eve revealed that she was able to tap into her abilities in the physical world. He said that she had to be exceptionally powerful, but I never expected this. I could actually feel her power, and it was extraordinary, and her anger seemed to be feeding it. Even Cadmiel seemed shaken by the girl's immense power. I thought back to the Hannock simulation, and the display she put on with only 5% of her power, and all I felt was panic. Eve was prone to go over the edge in normal situations. I could only imagine what she had in store for someone who violated and humiliated her sister in the way Cadmiel did. She stood, staring the girl down as she responded to our accusations. "I didn't lie. This isn't about my sister," she replied as the flames began to change, exploding into a bluish-orange blend. "It's about me." "How is she doing that?" I asked, staring in awe. "It's her sound elements. It amplifies her other abilities," Sai replied. "I knew she was amazing, but she purposely held this back from me and Pete. She cooked this up on her own. My guess is she didn't want us interfering with her plans. Man, Eve!" Sai stared at the girl helplessly as she absorbed all the sound all around her as her power continued to climb. Cadmiel was too ignorant to realize the danger she was in. She laughed at the sight, trying to hide her earlier reservations in an attempt to seem confident. "Do you really think this is what Beth would have wanted?" Sai continued, trying to talk sense into her. "Right now, I really don't care," she replied, emotionless. "It was my job to protect her. I should have done something, and I didn't. I let her get beat half to death." "Yep, and the same is about to happen to you," Cadmiel replied, pulling out her sword. I rolled my eyes in frustration at the girl's stupidity. "My gosh, these two are like peas in a pod," I shot in frustration. "She's as bad as Eve." "Is that so?" Eve replied, stretching her neck, now showcasing a steady stream of rage. Before we blinked, she regained her pistols. Cadmiel stared at her and chuckled arrogantly. "You are fast, I'll give you that," she mocked with a laugh. "But that won't be a problem once I go to Tier 4. Eve powered up even higher. "And what? You expect me to sit by twiddling my thumbs while you do it?" Eve shot. "Swift slice! Ah!" Eve shot, slicing another piece of Cadmiel's hair, dropping the girl to her knees before she could even think about powering up again. "You little pest!" Cadmiel replied, grabbing her hair, wincing in pain. "What's going on?" I asked, oblivious to what was happening. "Why is Eve targeting her hair?" "It's her Achilles heel," Sai replied. "Her what?" I replied. "Have you ever heard the story of Achilles, the demigod?" Sai replied, before answering her own question by staring at the dense look on my face. "Don't answer that. He was a demigod who had a weak spot on his heel. It's where we get the term Achilles heel, or the member of the Achilles tendon. Like Achilles, us Doms have a weak spot that is vulnerable to attack. It's a failsafe in case we ever rebel or turn." "So you're saying Cadmiel's hair is her weak spot?" I deducted. "I think Jade said something about that during our training, but he said you guys guarded that secret with your lives. How did Eve find it?" Sai shrugged apologetically. "I don't know, I wasn't here," Sai replied. "I didn't see the last fight." "It was Big Mouth over here," Eve broke in. "Her big fat mouth. She let it leak when she was bragging about putting my sister in the hospital, so it was hard to ignore. She let it slip that she was Nazarene or Nazarite. You know, like Samson." Cadmiel's jaw clenched at the sound of Eve's words. "She said she took pride in her Nazarite heritage. It sounded familiar to me, so I went and looked it up, and the story of Samson stuck out to me. You know, the hothead whose power was linked to his hair. Sound like someone you know? She mocked, pointing her pistol at the girl. Judges chapter 13 verse 7. You will become pregnant and give birth to a son. You must not drink wine or any other alcoholic drink, nor eat any forbidden food. For your son will be dedicated to God as a Nazirite from the moment of his birth until the day of his death. From that point on, I knew it was linked. I went back and looked at your battle with my sister, and I noticed that every time you went to another level, the length of your hair grew. You were pegged from that moment on. The beginning of the match was a ploy. I took a snippet of your hair to see if it actually weakened you, and my assumptions were confirmed each time. From that point on, I pushed you so that you could keep feeding yourself power, thus making your hair longer and easier to target. Like I said before, every step you took and every move you made put you precisely where I wanted you to be. That's impossible. My hair is fortified solid gold light energy. The only thing that could pierce it is condensed light energy, or a lightning bolt, she said, fuming. Eve smiled deviously as Sai and I shook our heads, not knowing if we should be angry or impressed. She pulled her remaining pistol from its holster, bringing both the guns together in a showcasing manner. Oh, that, she replied mockingly, surveying the pistols. You remember that whole wine thing from the passage? Well, these pistols happen to be dipped, then crystallized in the Heaven Realm's most expensive brand. Not that the price matters or anything, but I am a girl who tends to look for the best. Cadmiel fumed as she stared her down. You little earthborn scum, she replied, dashing at her. Dodge, slice, wham! Eve sidestepped her like it was child's play, ducking under her outstretched blow and slicing her hair as she countered with a shoulder blow, sending the helpless girl into a nearby pillar. Like I said, every time you think you're getting closer, you're right where I need you to be, and that's 3 steps behind me, she replied, walking over to her with hair blowing in the wind. The crowd was no longer cheering. There was a deaf silence as Eve ignored the scene and continued toward Cadmiel. I am Cadmiel Bahir, a true Nazirite, she replied. I will not embarrass my family by losing to an earthborn unknown with no extraordinary heritage. Boom! Kaboom! Cadmiel exploded in power, but before anyone could blink, Eve was clipping yet another strand of her hair. As Cadmiel dropped to her knees once again, as Eve finished her off with a roundhouse that almost snapped her in half. Yeah, Eve replied, coldly mocking the girl. I really don't care. She crumbled, falling to her hands and knees as Eve stood over her with a cold-blooded look in her eyes. No one can withstand my blows. How could you do it? Cadmiel replied, fighting to her feet. There's no way. Genius, I'm a sound user, Eve replied, glaring at her with an emotionless demeanor that gave me the creeps. I started training with Uriah the minute we got here. After a couple of lessons with him, I learned to control external sounds. Everything in existence has a sound wave. Uriah taught me to control the sounds around me, but even he had no idea how well I learned what he taught me. Even the most experienced sound users don't know how to control sound in real time. Most are time or precept verts. They don't have the traits to pull it off, at least not at my level. But even with my heightened touch and reflexes, it was a struggle. But eventually, I got it. After a couple days, I could stop a butterfly's wings from flapping without disturbing its flight. Cut! She mocked the girl, kicking her over, mirroring the scene with Beth days before. She trailed the girl as she fought to stand. Controlling an unsuspecting hothead was elementary. Your punch gives off a slight sound vibration that I simply used as a buffer. Add in some opportune dramatics, physical acting, a little bit of fake blood, and it wasn't hard to conceal the fact that none of your blows ever touched me. I just needed you to believe they did. The more powerful you became, the denser the sound wave became. Do you get it yet, genius? It's just like you told my sister. You never had a chance. Yeah, and I'm going to crush you like I did your sister, Cadmiel replied, shooting toward Eve yet again. Wham! Eve caught her in mid-flight with a leaping front kick. Cadmiel exploded off of her boot like a soccer ball off a striker's toe. A siren exploded, causing everyone in the stadium to groan. Man, Sai replied, flopping in her seat, annoyed. What's going on? I replied, oblivious. Sai shook her head. The validity of the duel has been challenged, she replied. What do you mean? Is Eve being kicked out or something? I pressed. No, it's about whether or not the trial will be forfeited, she answered solemnly. So is the trial over? I questioned. Judging by Eve's demeanor, it wasn't. She exploded in power. A blue orb appeared in front of her as she stood unaffected by the sound of the horn. This is for electrocuting my sister to force her to give in, she replied, sending an orb toward her. Zoom! Wham! Boom! Ah! The orb hit Cadmiel's lifeless body with shattering impact that sent her flying into a nearby wall, causing the girl to howl in pain. Eve, stop! It's over, Sai replied, standing up. She wishes, Eve replied, powering up for another attack. Swift! Zoom! Boom! Eve rocketed herself into the air like a missile, then plummeted toward Cadmiel, landing with pulverizing force. Cadmiel coughed up blood as Eve turned her heel and flicked Cadmiel's lifeless body to the side like gum off the bottom of her shoes. Eve, I said stop, Sai warned as Eve geared up for another attack. Tears streamed down Eve's eyes as powers seemed to surge all around her. Sai, you didn't see what she did to my sister. She could have just beat her, but she didn't just do that. She embarrassed her and tried to force her to give in. No, she uttered, booting the girl into the air once more. Wham, 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 wham! She went into overdrive, mimicking the attack Cadmiel used on her sister, pulverizing the girl's lifeless body as we watched on in horror. I could understand why Eve was doing what she was doing, and a part of me wanted to see the girl get what she deserved. But after stumbling in on the alphas, I realized the girl was a person with flaws much like Eve. It humanized her. I couldn't fight the sympathy I felt for her. Eve, what does this prove? Sai shot angrily, screaming into the intercom. Whether you do this or not, that still happened. Where are the proctors? I shot, turning to Sai. The siren signals the validity will be challenged afterwards. It doesn't stop the match. They still have to wait until one combatant can't compete, Sai explained, staring at Eve in a begging manner as Cadmiel's body landed with a hard thud. Eve landed seconds later, marching toward the girl again. That's enough, Eve, Sai responded. Just finish it. I'll finish it when she says she gives up, Eve shot, stalking the girl with an emotionless demeanor. Isn't that what she tried to do to Beth? Embarrass her for doing nothing more than trying. Do you know the damage she's done to my sister? No, she's going to pay for that if it's the last thing I'll do. Swift, swift, boom! As Eve shot in for her next attack, Sai exploded through the nearby wall. Before she could strike, Sai shot in her path, shielding Cadmiel. Stop, Sai said, standing in direct line of the girl's path. Sai wasn't moving, and Eve wasn't stopping. This wasn't good. I stood, not knowing what to do. Swift, swift! I stood in awe as Sai suddenly shot toward Eve. Boom! The paths collided. I had no other choice. I had to react. I didn't have time to think. I shot toward the exploded dust cloud. I paused in my tracks at the scene. When the dust settled, Sai stood cradling an emotionally distraught Eve. The girls were in an embrace, as Eve sobbed on Sai's shoulder like a broken child.